Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Georgia State Alumni Association and Women Lead, I want to thank you for joining us for today's coffee conversation with Lauren Koontz. My name is Audrey Durbin, and I am an honors student in my senior year here at Georgia State University, and I'm double majoring in marketing and managerial sciences. I'm a university assistant working in events at the Alumni Association. I am a 1913 Society Presidential Ambassador, as well as an Honors College Ambassador here on campus. I also participate in several signature programs at the Robinson College of Business, such as Panthers in the Valley, as well as being part of this fall's Women Lead class. I've had a phenomenal experience so far, really exploring effective leadership, hearing from role models, and growing as a woman in business and as a future leader. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, Women Lead equips female students with the skills, experiences, and networking opportunities needed to get a seat at the table among business leaders, and it's open to all students across all majors and colleges. We're excited to have a mix of students as well as alumni tuning in for today's program. In today's coffee conversation, Lauren Koontz will join Marcia Spiller for a conversation about female executive leadership in a time of crisis. Let's begin by meeting our first alum and moderator for today's program, Marcia Spiller. Marcia is the Vice President and Dean for Academic Affairs at Woodward Academy in College Park, Georgia. Prior to being appointed to this position, Spiller was head of the Children's School in Atlanta for more than 2 decades. Marcia earned her Master's of Education degree from Georgia State, class of 1992. Marcia, thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this conversation.
It's my pleasure, Audrey.
Next, I would like to introduce our second alum and featured speaker today, Lauren Koontz. Lauren is the first female CEO and president of the YMCA of Greater Atlanta. In this role, Lauren leads the organization's efforts to ensure that all people, especially children, experience an equal opportunity to reach their potential. Prior to working with the YMCA, Lauren has served in leadership development roles for education and health nonprofits. In 2018, Lauren was named to Leadership Atlanta's class of 2018, and in 2013, she was named among the Atlanta Business Chronicle's 40 Under 40. Lauren received an MBA from Georgia State University. Lauren, thank you so much for being here today.
It's such a pleasure that you all reached out to me, and I'm very excited to connect and talk with my friend Marcia and hopefully share some valuable insights for those that are a part of the webinar today.
Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to hearing it. Well, at this time, I will be stepping behind the curtain and passing this over to Marcia to kick off today's conversation.
Thank you, Audrey. Well, as Audrey said, Lauren, you are the first woman and CEO of YMCA of Metro Atlanta's history. It's a little hard to believe it took us this long to put a woman in charge. But sometimes when we're discussing the careers of women, there's a phenomena that's referred to as the glass ceiling, or even breaking the glass ceiling. But in fact, your leadership journey began at a relatively young age. Tell us about the early years of your career and how you were able to ascend so quickly.
Well, it feels, I think, to some people like I ascended quickly. I've been working now for about 25 years, and I think what was really interesting for me is that I started in the for-profit space, and while I was getting my MBA at Georgia State, I was working full-time actually in the sports marketing world. And I'd done an internship in nonprofit in college, and I felt drawn to this particular field, but I really wasn't sure if that was the direction. And I spent those first couple of years working in the sports marketing field. And at a certain point, I really made a fairly strategic decision and thought to myself, you know, having an MBA at a young age may get me further in a non-traditional path. I might be able to move up more quickly. And it wasn't really just, ambition of trying to move up. I really wanted to make impact in the community as soon as I could. And I felt that the way to do that was to have a seat at the table. And quite frankly, having an MBA and moving into a nonprofit space made me stand out a bit. There weren't a lot of people in the nonprofit space that had MBAs. And so I was able to lean into what I had learned in the classroom, what I had learned with, my various group projects, and really kind of use that to my advantage early on to set myself apart within the nonprofit space of someone who came to this space to make an impact, but thought like a business person. As we often say in nonprofit, no money, no margin, no mission, right? So at the end of the day, you have to run every organization, including nonprofits, as a business so that you can fulfill the mission and the work that you've been charged to do.
Well, those of us who have had the pleasure of working with you certainly know that you are making an impact. So thank you for all that you do. Do you recall any biases or assumptions that were made about you during your journey to executive leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's gender and at one point, age. I was acutely aware in my 20s that people kind of constantly referred to, wow, you're young to have this particular role, or that always seemed to come up. And at one point I remember thinking, I can't wait to turn 30 because then people will take me seriously. But the reality is, I think at the end of the day, if you put in the work and you're willing to take on those tough assignments and show up as a leader, people begin to see past that. I think from a leading as a woman, there's absolutely been times that I felt, especially earlier on, and maybe just even 5 or 6 years ago, that my voice in a meeting was somewhat discounted, maybe by a colleague or because of my gender, or in some cases, my perceived, age or youth. I think you have to be aware of it, but you cannot let that paralyze you. You have to really be strategic about how you are going to show up, how you're going to own your own space. And at some point, it's really not your problem. It's somebody else's problem. I think it's that old saying of like, what people think of you is none of your business. So, you just have to, hold yourself to the standard that you want to hold yourself to. You need to show up and own that space. You need to project confidence. You need to do the research and be ready so that, when you need to make a point, you feel really good about that. And, you just, at some point, you don't allow people to put you in that box, and you have to kind of rise above that.
Those are some great strategies that you shared. Could you share what your greatest risk has been or that you've taken as a professional? Is there anything that stands out in your career as really being risky?
Well, I really built kind of my reputation on being a nonprofit leader, but in the development space, raising funds, doing a lot of consulting for nonprofits. I had not really been on the operating side. And an organization like the Y here in Atlanta is a very large enterprise, about $100 million organization, multiple lines of business across education, wellness, youth development, community programming. And to really make myself a viable candidate as a potential CEO in this organization, I needed to shift out of the spaces that I had cut my teeth, which were development and marketing and partnerships. And I needed to get into kind of the nitty-gritty operations. I needed to roll up my sleeves and understand how our early learning centers ran, what our after-school sites looked like, how our branches operated. And so I really moved out of the space that I felt really comfortable in and took a risk and said, I'm going to lean into this discomfort so I can expand my skill sets, expand my experiences, which ultimately I hoped would make me a stronger candidate for this potential role.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to your title as CEO and president, you have another very important title, and that's the role of mom to your 2 children. Tell us about your experience navigating your career and parenthood simultaneously.
Well, I mean, I wish I could sit here and say, oh, it's been so easy and, I just had it all figured out. Boy, I mean, anybody who says that, I think is just basically glossing over the tougher days. And you add to this, my husband is a software executive that pre-pandemic traveled 3 days a week, 3 weeks a month. So in many ways, there were days that I really was juggling it all by myself. I think the first thing that I learned really early on, my kids are now almost 18 and 15, but when they were little, I really had to go ahead and give myself grace. And I had to say, there might be some things that I miss, but I'm not going to miss the things that are truly important to them. And even at a young age, I mean, I sat my kids down and talked with them about, I have to be at this board meeting, or I have to be at this, event. I won't be able to come to this, but I'll be at the next one. And remember, I was at the one before. I think, being really open it's been a great thing for my daughter. She really understands that, some days and some days I'm maybe a better CEO than I am a mom and a wife. And some days I'm a better mom and a wife than a CEO. And I think giving yourself the grace to understand that you're not going to be perfect and you're not going to get it all right every day. And it's really about the moments that you show up for as a parent. But I mean, I've juggled. I can't tell you how many times that I've had both of my kids in a car, run through Starbucks to get a friend a coffee as a thank you, dropped my kids off so she could take them to school at 6:30 in the morning so I could be at a breakfast meeting at 7:30. So, I think the key is maybe I made it look easier than it was, but I was committed to this work. I was committed to the organizations that I was a part of. And it was just about trying to find some sort of balance. But some days it was easier than others.
Well, we really appreciate your honesty. A recent Forbes article reported that full-time working mothers are making only 71 cents to a father's dollar. What is your response to this data? And why do you think the gaps still exist?
Well, I lived that. I actually had a scenario where a colleague and I were both promoted to the same role. And I knew he was making a significant amount of money before that, more than I was. And when we were promoted into these equal roles, literally the same title with the same responsibilities, just having different geographies, I was not offered additional compensation. And I went to the CEO of the organization at the time and I said, I believe you've missed something. Basically, you and I both know that this gentleman is being paid quite a bit more than I am. We now are in the same roles. I don't feel that that's appropriate. And I think you should, think about kind of what this looks like. It's unfortunate. I still think there's this stigma out there, which is just so untrue of, oh, we've got to pay men more because they're they're the breadwinners. And that's just not the case. If you look at the data, 50% of working two-parent working households are females are the primary breadwinner. And so I think we have to be active in dispelling this misinformation. And I think right now we're seeing a real crisis because of the pandemic of losing female leadership, because so many women who already juggle so much either were laid off or made choices to stay at home with their kids because kids couldn't go to school. And I think we're going to see a real impact of the loss of female leadership for many years to come because of the pandemic. But to the point of equal pay, do not let people, I'm just going to say it, you have to address it. You have to do it head on. And the reality is in the environment that we're in right now, if organizations are not looking at equity, at pay from an equitable standpoint, both gender and in terms of race, they're putting themselves in a very, very dangerous position. So I think you're being an advocate for yourself, but you're also helping the organization be where it needs to be, quite frankly, to attract talent, retain talent, and keep it from getting in trouble. So speak up. I just at that point was not going to do the same job as a man and get paid 30% less.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the pandemic. Let's pivot there. COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities, and it's pushed the social sector to pivot and stretch in unprecedented ways. So tell us a little bit about your week one as CEO of the YMCA and what it was like to be in your shoes when everything changed in March of last year.
Well, I came into the CEO position in July 1st, 2019. So I had about 8 months in the role before the pandemic hit, which certainly is not a lot of time to get very comfortable. We had very ambitious plans as it related to where the organization was going. So we were already running pretty fast in terms of what we were trying to accomplish. A lot of people think of the YMCA in the specific way that they have interacted with the Y in their own past. So maybe they went to a resident camp at a Y, or they learned to swim at a Y, or they work out at a Y. But very few people, and this is our fault for not really telling the story as fully as we need to, and we're working on that, but very few people really understand the breadth and depth of programming that the Y provides. So we're the largest provider of early learning in the state of Georgia. 90% of the children we serve are poverty level or below. We are a huge provider of after-school care across Metro Atlanta. Of course, we have our membership and community wellness facilities that have programming out of that. So, the list goes on and on. We touch really hundreds of thousands of people every single day. So we went from, on March 10th, 2020, really business as usual. Of course, we were monitoring what was happening with COVID. We were beginning to have conversations of what it may look like for us if we had to make changes. 3 days later, with the governor's executive order, all of our early learning centers and after school sites were shut down. And 3 days later, all of our locations were shut down. So in the course of literally 1 week, we went from business as usual to every single line of business we had was shut down. Doors were closed. And so we really had to ask ourselves, I think, two critical questions. The first one was, in keeping with our mission as a nonprofit to serve community, what could we do to help? What were we uniquely positioned to do to help? And the other thing was, how are we going to create programming so that all of our paying members don't leave? At the heart of the YMCA as a nonprofit, we are a business. If you look at our annual operating budget, 60% of our budget is earned revenue through membership and program fees. Another 23% is state and federal grants specifically for Head Start, Georgia Pre-K, food grants, highly restricted dollars for those that need our support the most. And then the last piece of it is the philanthropy that allows us to provide scholarships and stand-up programming for communities. So it was critical to not lose that earned revenue base. So we did two things right away. The first one, to making sure we didn't lose all of our membership. We almost overnight banded together with 10 other large YMCAs around the country, and we started creating online content, streaming content that we were offering to our members. We were putting out all sorts of information around education, wellness, anything that was helping people deal with what they were facing in that moment, children home from school, all of it. So that was kind of one piece of what our staff was working on. The other piece is we looked around, and because we are in the Head Start and after school business, we have 4 commercial kitchens. We serve hot meals every day, twice a day, to 3,000 children. So we thought, well, we've got all of these facilities across Metro Atlanta that are closed, and what could we do? So we worked with the state of Georgia, opened up 7 of those facilities for emergency childcare for those who were working on the front lines of COVID, in hospitals, in grocery stores, warehouses. Basically, if you didn't have the luxury of working from home and needed childcare, we were providing that for you. We were obviously early adopters of masks and social distancing and temperature checks and pod-based learning. So that was one piece that was a huge support to the community. The other one is we leveraged all of our locations, worked with 65 different regional partners like the Atlanta Community Food Bank, the Atlanta Braves, and basically turned all of our sites into a massive food distribution network. So between March 2020 and December 2020, we served more than 550,000 meals out of a YMCA. So it really, to me, everybody's favorite word was pivot. And yes, we, of course, pivoted. But what I learned in that moment was this large organization that has multiple sites and multiple program lines. I didn't even realize how nimble and agile we could be if we prioritized doing the things that we were uniquely qualified to do, like childcare and food programming. And being able to do that has really changed the entire way our organization thinks about who we are. I kind of say we went from being this massive ocean liner to being a speedboat. And, to really be a relevant community organization, you have to be able to move at that speed. You have to be able to identify what's happening on the ground in communities, what are the challenges, and how can we uniquely step in and provide solutions and or partner with others to really address those. So I think that's one of the biggest learnings and silver linings of the pandemic, is really kind of putting into the organization's DNA that we work like a startup, not like a organization that's been in Atlanta for 163 years. And I think thinking in that way is what will allow us to continue to be relevant as we look to the future.
Yes, you're clearly a visionary and nimble and agile, absolutely, the way that Y was operating at that time and continues to. I know that many of our audience members today are aspiring community leaders from Georgia State's Women Lead program. So for all of our viewers today, but specifically thinking about these students who are watching, tell us, what is your why? What issues in our community keep you up at night, but also motivate you in your role as a civic leader?
So for me, it all boils down to the idea that I don't believe that the circumstances of one's birth should dictate the future of that individual. And I believe deeply in equal access to education, to quality education from a young age, to opportunities to gain the skills that one needs to be successful in school and college or technical school or in the workplace. I believe that if you see it, you can be it. And it's critical that we make sure that youth, especially those in underserved communities, see pathways for themselves in high growth areas. So for me, I think the worst thing is when I see a child and think that their future has been decided for them. What I want is for every child and every family to have the resources that they need and the skills they need to basically chart their own course and to live up to their full potential. That's really what drives me. I have the really unique experience. Our headquarters for all of our Ys sits right here on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, right at Northside Drive. And so when I walk in every day, to my immediate left is the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and to my immediate right is the Herndon Home. And the Herndon Home, for those who don't know, is the home of the first millionaire African-American in Atlanta, who walked to Atlanta from Social Circle, Georgia, after being a slave, walked barefoot and created a thriving barbershop here, and then founded Atlanta Life Insurance. And he became the first African-American millionaire and built this beautiful home that sits right here and is still a museum. But the reality is that Northside Drive separates downtown and midtown and all of the promise, the economic promise and upward mobility that could be. And our headquarters sits on the area of the west side of Atlanta, where you still have a statistic out of Harvard University as recently as 2 years ago that only 5% of the children born in this neighborhood will ever hit the top level of income bracket. And so it comes back to this idea that this building physically sits between the promise and the history. And how can we as an organization help bridge that through early education, through curriculum and after school and summer programs, through teen leadership, through all of just helping kids and families have access to what will help them, again, chart their own path. So it's a very visible reminder when I walk into work every day of the unique role that we play in making sure that people are able to get those skills.
Mm-hmm. Well, in your time of leading the Y, and particularly through the pandemic, I'm sure that you have made some self-discoveries and have led yourself to some lessons learned. Do you have some leadership takeaways that you want to share with us that you learned during this crisis?
I think leadership is sometimes scary, and certainly during the pandemic. I mean, I was very early in this role and was focused, basically my role, I tell people I'm not the chief executive officer. I'm the chief stewardship officer of an organization that's been doing good work in this community for over 160 years. In my time leading this organization, I should be even stronger and better positioned to be the organization that is still doing great work 50 years from now. And so I believe it's, as a leader, it's obviously important to listen. It's important to look to the future. It's important to synthesize all the relevant data that you need to then make a decisive decision. Culture is critical. Investing in your people, being vulnerable, showing people that, you don't have it all. I tell people all the time, I do not have all the answers. My job is to ask the right questions. And then as a team, we're going to figure out where we go from there. I believe that every single person that works at one of our locations should create value every single day. I value merit over tenure. I think tenure and experience is great, but I want everybody to show up every day ready to really create value for the organization. So, I think your journey as a leader is a combination of the people that you work with, work for, your family, and then what you've learned along the way. So and I'm still on this journey. I mean, God willing, I have hopefully another 15 or 20 years to continue to make an impact. And, hopefully a year from now, I look back at this and go, oh my gosh, Lauren, you didn't know anything, right? You've learned so much in a year. So, my goal is always to continually be improving on myself. I know I'm a work in progress and I don't have it perfect right now. And I'll get stronger and better as a leader the more that I go through difficult times.
Well, really appreciate your candor. We do have a question that we have been sent, and it is that there is much talk how vulnerability supports trust, and yet there is also literature about managing authenticity and the dangers of transparency. So the question is, what are and how do we build the internal skills so that sharing and openness works to our advantage?
So I think the word vulnerability gets a bad name. I think the way I would approach it is, I'm always trying, I tell our entire team, whether you are a part-time employee at a Y, whether you're a CFO, I'm going to be as transparent with you as I possibly can be. My goal is to make sure that you know what I know so we can work together. And I think it has to start with that level of transparency. And when you're transparent with people and when you're showing people that you don't have an agenda as a leader, your agenda is what is the organization's purpose, mission, strategic plan, right? And that you're delivering on that as a team. So for me, it all starts with, I think being transparent is being vulnerable. And as a leader, there are some uncomfortable truths that you sometimes have to share with people that might be easier for you to just navigate alone, but that's not the point of having a team. And so I think I wouldn't get tripped up on the word vulnerability. I think I would lean more into transparency, communication, and being authentic to who you are, not trying to lead the way somebody else does. But it's also being really open to knowing that we all have to work on certain things. I'm a big believer in coaching. I have had a couple different coaches over the years. I pride myself on being coachable. I want people to tell me, give me feedback. My biggest fear is that people in this organization would tell me what they think I want to hear versus what I need to hear. And so I think you have to establish that trust that people can come to you, they can be honest with you, you're going to be honest with them, you're going to be transparent. And, I think it's important. I weave in stories and share things of times when I kind of failed. I didn't do so great on something. And I weave that in and I talk a lot about it's okay to fail up, fail fast. We're not perfect. Let's pilot something. If it doesn't work, we do something else. So I think creating that culture where it's okay to not be perfect and then modeling that is really the way I look at the idea of vulnerability. It's not, sitting in a meeting crying, obviously. It's a different type of transparency around leadership.
Well, Lauren, I think our time is up, and it has certainly been a pleasure having this conversation with you, and I'm going to turn things back to Audrey.
Well, on behalf of the Alumni Association and Women Lead, I want to thank you both again for being here today. I personally really admire you both, and we appreciate you candidly sharing your wisdom and experiences with our audience, and for being a champion for women in so many aspects of your work. Both of you represent Georgia State in such a positive and powerful way in your communities and beyond, and we're so grateful for your time today. Before we sign off, I want to encourage our audience to visit alumni.gsu.edu for more information on future alumni programs and events. And you can visit robinson.gsu.edu to learn more about the Women Lead program. Please take a moment to complete the brief survey that will be delivered to your email shortly. And have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.